So the first thing I want to do is say thank you to everyone who's on. We are doing this in a webinar format. So that is not the traditional Zoom meeting format. So you're not going to see everybody else. That allows Colin and I to control a little bit more of what we're going through and keep it more manageable. What we're going to do is you're seeing a Generation Bridge type of event. We wish we could do this all in person. I'm a big face-to-face fan. I love events. I love conferences, seminars, but we just can't do that in today's environment. So we were originally scheduled to do this at the Monroe Senior Center. I think it was back in March, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
And then we postponed it to May. And then we postponed it again to today, doing it online. And now we've opened it up to a wider audience. So we really do want to have these sort of more intimate face-to-face things. But in the meantime, we think this information is important to get out. So Generation Bridge, so you guys understand it, is a little tiny platform of events and seminars and those types of things that started at the United Methodist Church here in Monroe. We started doing something for the sandwich generation. And since then, I'm morphing it into something a little bit bigger in terms of breaking down stereotypes of generations so that it's not us versus them, boomers versus millennials, that kind of thing, and understanding that we are all better when we share wisdom and we share experiences with each other. We look at things more from a life stage issue component as opposed to a generational or year that you were born issue. I always equate this to, I'm a 44-year-old guy, but I have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-month-old now. And so I'm in a very similar life stage as someone who might be 20 years younger than me. And so while I was born at a different time, I'm still doing the same things. And that's really how we look at it. It's about what you're facing. So today, Colin and I had met last year when we were doing the Caregiver and Aging Conference. And he was helping out with the stages of livability in terms of staying at home, moving, or potentially moving into assisted care and so forth. And we really thought this was an important topic to go over. So we've created this should I stay or should I go presentation. And the way it will work is that Colin is going to present first, and he's going to talk about sort of the should I stay. Colin will introduce himself. He does a much better job of that than I do. So I will let him do that when we get going. But he's going to talk about what are the things that we can do to stay at home. And it's not all about grab bars. There's so many more elements to this in terms of enjoying the latter years of our lives. And then I'm going to talk about, when he's ready to kind of transition over to me, I'll talk about sort of, if you're thinking about making a move. I'm a realtor here in Connecticut. I run Generation Bridge as well. But it's very near and dear to my heart. I've helped my parents. They live in Rhode Island, so I couldn't be their realtor, but I've helped them in terms of understanding what are the things they need to do. And I was able to help them with their move. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you want to think about when you're ready to move, but also that little personal story that I have with them. So without much further ado, other than that, I would say that you can take a look at the chat function and ask questions throughout that. Whoever's not presenting will be monitoring that chat. And then at the end of each presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more about, or we're going to go over whatever questions we can fit in time allotting. And then we'll move on to the next presentation. So feel free to ask questions in the webinar. And if Colin is talking, I'll try and monitor that, and we'll come back to those questions when he's done. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Colin, and I'm going to give it over to you.
All right. So in the same way that Brian introduced himself, I am a different generation from Brian. I won't tell you how old I am, but I do have a 41-year-old as a son. And I helped both my parents through their transition to the afterlife, or however you'd like to say it. And that was really the thing that drew me into design for aging in place. I've been doing all sorts of design for my entire career.
Hey, Colin, yes. Sorry to interrupt, but I think your screen is not being shared.
Oh, isn't that interesting? That's what I was looking for. There we go. Sorry about that. It's the function of just getting started here. So I've been involved in design for many, many years. A good 25 to 30 years of that has been architectural design, and this relatively new 10-year obsession with helping older people stay in their homes longer. But one of the things that's often not taken into account when we think about the monetary issues around doing remodeling design is the extra value of design for aging in place or building for aging in place. And so I'll get into that in a moment. My company, Colin Healy Design, specializes in transforming homes for transforming lives, helping people with working through the different needs that they have at different times of their lives. And my mission is to help you design the home you need for the life that you want to live. So aging in place is the top choice for most people today. They say that they would like to live in their home as long as they can. 87% in this recent poll said that. And typical projects that allow that to happen are first floor master suites, having one floor living, adding an accessible bathroom and kitchen, moving the laundry out of the basement, or even putting on a fairly large investment like an accessory dwelling unit. An ADU is the acronym for that, or an in-law apartment. So in order to make the right decision, there are a number of things that have to be in place for a person who chooses that they want to stay at home. So these three areas, the person, the support network, and the place, are all important. So under the person, it's finances, activities of daily living, which mean washing, bathing, cooking, and so forth. And all these other factors need to be considered. The support network needs to be in place, connection to your community, the ability to be able to move around, having family and friends close by. Without a network, it becomes very difficult. And if those two elements are broadly in place, then you could consider staying in your home longer. Then you have to decide, well, will it be the house that I'm in, or will I buy another house, maybe in the same community, but it needs maybe less work than mine, and it might be that you're downsizing at the same time. So there are decisions to make there, but the broad decision, should I stay or should I go, is, am I going to try to live at home, or am I going to go to some retirement community, or am I going to try to go to an assisted living facility or something like that. So I always urge people that the right time to do this is as soon as possible. It's best to explore your options while you still can in a relaxed mode, rather than waiting till you're in the midst of a crisis and you have to make decisions in a big hurry. So if you are thinking in a long-term time frame, you can consider preparing your home for resale even as far as 10 years off. So the things that we do while we're doing design and while we're doing construction should always be a step towards thinking of what happens when we decide to sell. But we never let ourselves get too wrapped up in what will the other person want. We just have to do reasonable things. So begin early to make reasonable upgrades. Decluttering is really important. Removing safety hazards and code violations is something that I help people with. And getting permits closed out on pending projects. You'd be surprised how many people don't follow through with their permits even when they've taken them. And in order to sell the house, they need to clear that up. But I don't think about remodeling design just as kind of the nuts and bolts of 2x4s and insulation and so forth. It's also an opportunity for transformation. So in the interview process that I go through with people, I'm looking for their motivations. What are their dreams? What are the things that they always meant to do but didn't get around to? And how can we make the home serve those needs in your elder years? So I created this little document that's available on my website that I call 12 Principles for Fulfilled Retirement Living. And I'm not going to go through them all. You can see quickly what they entail. But the lower left-hand corner, I've got my email address, or I'm sorry, my website, and you can go on there and order it if you'd like. But just to hit the high points, creating a home for life is really important. If you're going to spend more money upgrading your home because you want to stay there another 5 to 10 years, then try to do the things that will make it good, not just for you, but for the oldest and youngest members of the family. And don't leave behind your ideas of what makes you happy. So plan for what brings you joy. One of my clients asked me to create an art studio because they never got around to all that painting that they wanted to do. We took one of the kids' bedrooms and turned it into an art studio. So aging in place gracefully, you can do a Google search on this and you'll come up with 1,000 ideas of what's important. But this is just a little case study about my mom. This is Evelyn Healy, and this is her dream home that she and my dad built. And I actually helped my dad work on this house, so I guess you know how old I am now. And it's a little cape that had the master bedroom on the first floor and one bedroom for the kids on the first floor. And at a certain point, I had a business building greenhouses. And when my grandfather was living with us and became ill at the same time, my dad built this greenhouse. And my grandfather was a lifelong gardener and was really in a funk. And the greenhouse and the ability to use the plants and spend time out there in the sun really added a couple of years to his life. So I got to see the power of all these things and decided to get myself certified as an aging in place specialist. So there's a lot of very specific knowledge about how to make homes more accessible and how to work with people who are going through these life transitions. There's a concept that I was already familiar with but got into in more detail called universal design, which figures into design for aging in place. So this is also a document on my website that you can order or have me send you. But it's the high points of thinking through from the driveway all the way to the bathroom and the bedroom. How do I make the home accessible? And we won't go into that in great detail today, but flooring safety is one of the big issues, because if you had it in your mind that one of your transitions was to go to assisted living, when you go there, you need to be able to walk in. You can't go in a wheelchair because they're not equipped to help people with that kind of transition. So falls need to be prevented because that's the #1 way to go right to the nursing home. So who needs universal design? It's for people of all ages. So it's not just older adults. The little kid in the middle who's pulling on that lever handle for the door is illustrating that his lack of strength makes it easy for him to do that with a lever, and that's the same for an older person. And there are veterans and other kinds of disabilities that we cater to. So when I drive around, I always am aware of the very visible accessibility modifications that people make to their houses and often how poorly done they are. And they can actually hurt home values when, if you're planning ahead and really working these things into your plans, they can actually raise your home value. And you can clearly see this bathroom is an accessible bath, but it's also a luxurious bath. This, if you can see my pointer, I'm pointing out the walkway on this house. It's something called the zero entry, where we've gradually raised the landscape and actually raised the porch to the level where a wheelchair could roll right into the house. And you don't see the telltale accessible ramp on the outside. So these concepts of making homes accessible have really hit the mainstream at this point. So this is an article 2 years ago in the New York Times about a particular developer called Lennar, who introduced in one of their developments the idea of always having an attached dwelling unit attached to every unit that they were building in this development. So the idea is that that flexible space could be used for guests, caregivers, adult children coming to visit, Airbnb rental. You could even downsize yourself and live in that apartment while you rent out your bigger house. And in certain parts of the country, like the West Coast, ADUs are super investment vehicles now, because you can earn a lot of money on the rents that you get from these things, and you get tax advantages. We haven't caught up here in the East, but there's a lot of lobbying going on. So there's a website that you might all find very interesting called Cost versus Value, where you can go onto it. You can choose the area that's closest to you. I can't recall whether I chose Bridgeport or Hartford. There are only two available in Connecticut, so I probably chose Bridgeport. But it has 20 different home remodeling projects that are kind of popular. And it says for a bathroom addition, as an example, the job cost would likely be $48,000. So here that means you add it onto the house. There's structure involved to do this. It's not just changing fixtures. But the resale value could be as high as 94%. Now that is an extraordinary thing, because most of the things that you can do are in the 50% range, or often lower. Swimming pool is, you don't want to be adding a swimming pool if you're looking to sell your house, because you won't get the money back. But within the range of things that people do for accessibility, bathroom addition, universal design bath, 82%, a master suite addition, 60%. Anything over 50 is really kind of a good thing, particularly if you're sticking around in your home. You wouldn't necessarily want to do this in order to convince somebody to buy your house, but if you're going to use it, it's a good thing to do. So the extra value is accounting for the avoided costs of not moving to assisted living too early, or having your kids get all nervous and move you out before you need to go. And the older we get, the more likely that is to happen, where they see that we're becoming less able to make decisions, and they take control. So if you look at the average cost of assisted living, recent numbers are 70 to 90,000 per year in Connecticut. A couple of years ago, it was costing us 60 for my mom in a suite that consisted of 2 private bedrooms with a shared bath in between. And we counted ourselves lucky to be paying the 60, but that's pretty common for now. And according to a lawyer that many of us know, 100,000 to 150,000 per year is the going rate for nursing home care. So on the low end, if you take $70,000 a year times 2, and you get $140,000, that's roughly the cost of room and board for 2 years in an assisted living facility. So if you were to make that choice of going to assisted living, you get mostly fees spent for room and board and some minor medical care. If you choose to stay at home and invest in your home, that goes into equity and a continuity of your lifestyle. So in my way of looking at things, that could be a good investment if your time frame is long enough. And 7 in my 12 principles for fulfilled living is keeping the money in the family, because my mom down here and my dad planned well. Our whole family was able to get some benefit from their frugality and their creativity with finances throughout the years. So if someone was interested in doing design for aging in place, It often starts with a home safety evaluation, then some meetings to identify needs and passions. Then that goes into creating architectural plans. Once there are plans in place, we can budget for the project, and then I help people choose a contractor and actually get involved in helping to make sure that the contract is carried through properly. So here's just an example of a project that happens to be a new home that I designed and helped the owner with construction in the Wilton area. And it's a pretty big house, and it has a fully accessible first floor, and those decks around the house are accessible. And you remember a few slides back, I was talking about the zero entry. We're still in the landscaping point when I took this picture, so this will eventually be paved, but you can see how the driveway comes right up to the level of the house. And if you look right across here, that the level of the slab in the garage is the same level as the interior of the house. With a tiny little ramp here, we'd be able to get right up onto the porch as well. And there's an ADA sill here, and that allows us to, the fact that you can get to the deck around it allows you to have all that access to the outdoors. So here's the floor plan. This is the garage. This is the house. Here's that ADA sill that I talked about. There's one here too. ADA is the Accessibility Act, and the requirement for a sill there is it can't be any more than ½ an inch high, and it's got a couple of nice little bevels. The sliding doors or French doors are a little bit more difficult, but a tiny little ramp on each side of the one we choose to be the main one that we need would get you right directly out onto the deck. These little circles that you see here represent a 5-foot turning radius of a wheelchair, and I kind of put those around on the plan to, as a visual reminder that I've figured out that these spaces are adequate for moving around. Here, this is showing the second floor. Often, we don't worry so much about accessibility on the second floor, but even a person that doesn't need a wheelchair might still need to have a slightly larger bathroom and the ability to get around, and a stair lift to the second floor could also make a 2-story home accessible. So here's one last thing to think about. This home is one that I actually sold to the client many years ago. I was involved in the design and sold them a home package. And they called me up years later. The idea here was to, for a fellow who was retiring that wanted to have a retirement office for, maybe he'd go into real estate or do some investing, and he wanted to have a place, I really think it was to hang out with his buddies. And he wanted a place for his car collection. He had 3 cars around town that he wanted to bring home. And the idea of having 5 garage doors in a row would turn this thing into something that looked like a railroad train. So he's the kind of guy that could take a car like this and turn it into something like this. And so our final solution here was to make a garage that put the 3 cars end to end. So we only had one more garage door, and then to have the space over this as his retirement office and some additional storage. Here's our outdoor entry. And this is the garage. Here's that front entry. This is the existing condition. And that's the garage added on over on the side here. We put a door in the back as well, and it's not used very frequently, so you can drive cars around on the lawn, and that worked out fairly well for him. And then what I planned here for the upstairs is exactly what he asked me for. He wanted a storage area. He wanted to have a bathroom, a little waiting room for people to wait if they were lined up. He also wanted an office with a conference table and a fireplace. So when I did the research on zoning, this is up in northern Connecticut where they're very liberal with their zoning, I found that I could get this approved not only as a retirement office, which is a home occupation permit, but by working with the zoning rules, and this is just showing a section through the middle, and it shows that that office space has a high ceiling. This is the storage area, the entry area, and the new office space. I discovered that they would allow a accessory dwelling unit in that space as well. So I spent a couple of hours creating a plan for him, and when we submitted the plans, we have in hand the permit for both. So it's that long-term thinking that I like to bring to my projects to get the most value from your design, whatever you're doing. So this is just a quick example of what's involved in starting design with somebody like me. So I have an Ask the Designer free phone call. Anybody here can call and ask me about anything about design. There's no charge for that. My first meeting is an on-site consultation where I give all sorts of great ideas and feedback on your property and get you started in the right direction. Often the first step is an aging in place home evaluation. And we figure out what are the barriers to moving about the home for somebody that's planning to stay there for a while. So that's the end of my presentation. And what I'd like to do is open this up to questions. Brian, did you get anything in the chat?
We had a couple of questions. So Marcy had asked if the slides will be shared after, and I said that we were working on creating something that we could share as early as Monday, but we are still a little bit new with the platform on the webinar side. So how we can get that message out and where we can put it, that's another question, but we'll figure it out. But I wanted to just verify that with your side of this of the presentation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be the slides. It may be the recording.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a YouTube channel, and it may be that we'll do a little bit of editing and then pop it up on the YouTube channel. As I mentioned, I have a few very useful documents that are immediately available on my website that are actually in more detail than what I have here. And I know Brian has a handout that he's working on.
Yeah, my slides are a little bit less intense and more visual, but I have some notes that I use with them that have some helpful links. So I'll just be sharing that one outright. But it's good to know. So we will definitely get you guys something, and we are recording, and Generation Bridge also has a channel, so we'll make sure we get that up there as well. I have another question from Beverly Kidder. In Connecticut, how do we know if a town permits ADUs?
So you can go on to virtually any town's website in Connecticut and pull up their zoning regulations, and you can search them yourself. It's one of the services that I perform for people if they want me to do it, where I research those things. But the typical things that first of all, the state of Connecticut, within the last 2 years, has a resolution that they passed that's encouraging towns to support ADUs. Not every town signed on to it, and each town has slightly different regulations about how many adults can live in a house. It's typical for an ADU where the owner of the house has to live in the dwelling. It's not necessary that the other person or the other family that's living there, let's say it's a husband and a wife, have to be related, but the owners have to live in one of the 2 units. So that's pretty common. And then there are various regulations about whether it has to be attached or if they'll allow it to be detached. And so when I do presentations, I typically look at the town that I'm in and do a quick survey of what those regulations are. So if you wanted to talk about that, you could call and I can get into more detail with you.
Okay, I have a couple more questions here. One from Frank. So what would you estimate the return on adding that 2 to 3 car garage to a house that already had a 2-car garage would be like in that example you showed?
It probably wouldn't be great. You know, and it would probably restrict your buyer pool to people looking for houses with 5-car garages. So that probably wouldn't be a prime example of an ADU that I would say would immediately add a huge value to your house, except to the right buyer.
Right. And to the individual who's obviously living there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what it was all about. The owner was he owned a crane company for years, and he did well. He's got a couple of other houses, and he just wanted his car collection to be at home, and money wasn't a big problem for him. So he wasn't thinking in those terms. Most of my clients do think in terms of what's the best investment value.
So we also had a question from Darlene. Again, just to get a little bit more of sort of what an ADU is. I know it's an accessory dwelling unit, but is there another way that you would just describe what it is?
Okay, so some of the features that are common to an accessory dwelling unit is they're intended to be a self-sufficient part of a house that another person can live in, that has its own kitchen or cooking facility. It doesn't have to be a full-blown kitchen, but you have to be able to make meals there. And it would have its own bathroom. It would have a separate entry. It's common to have regulations that forbid having that second entry be visible from the street, because it gives the impression that it's no longer a single home in a single home dwelling zoning zone is what I'm trying to say, a residential zone. So there are also size minimums and maximums for these. So they may say that it can't be any smaller than, say, 300 square feet, but the maximum size could be related either to a percentage of the floor area of the house, not to exceed that, or it could just be a flat number that you can't be any bigger than 800 square feet regardless. And I've had situations where I've helped people in towns that insisted on having the accessory dwelling unit in the home, and I helped them get a unconnected ADU done, and I've helped people with size limitations as well through some creativity. So the rules are there to be followed, but they're also there to be bent if we can.
Sounds good. And we have a follow-up question to that. So an ADU and an in-law, differences between them, or are they pretty much the same, or one's underneath the umbrella of another?
Yeah, they're the same thing. There are other names, granny flats, there are any number of slang terms for these things. But the prime thing is it's a private area that has its own entrance, and it should be not requiring that person to come into the house to have meals with the family.
Sounds good. I think ultimately the big piece there is, you know, either you're working with a professional who can talk to the zoning people in their language, or you want to just make sure that if you're thinking about doing this, you talk to your own zoning, your town zoning, and ask them some good questions. I've found them to be very helpful, particularly here in Monroe. I think depending on where you go, you can have different people that are there, but most of the time they're very helpful, and they're willing to answer questions like that.
I would also just add, don't rely on your builder to know these things. If you're trying to do this directly with a builder, because my experience has been that they really don't take the time to figure this all out.
I would go on that. And so we have a question from Evie. What about a granny pod tiny house on the property? So like a separate home, so to speak, that maybe isn't attached to the house.
I would say that you just have to go right to your building department, to the zoning department, and tell them what you're planning and get their feedback, because there's no one rule that governs for every town.
Yeah, it's very different by each town, and you might be able to find certain exceptions too, depending on what you're willing to live with. But I would just say that I think ultimately the options are very broad, and it really helps to talk with someone if you're in that mode. It's good to have a conversation with Colin. I know he said he's got a 20-minute free consultation. It's good to start asking those questions, or someone else that you might know in the space or that might understand zoning. Should we move on to the should I go portion?
Yeah, I think so. I'm gonna stop my screen share. Thank
Okay.
you very much for those questions. They're great. I'm finding a lot of, so Brian, you can share yours. I'm finding a lot of interest right now in accessory dwelling units, and I have 3 of them in design right now.
And I think we're going to have some overlap in our stuff, because I know you've talked about some of the things that I'll be going over. In the interest of time, we've got about 20 minutes. I've run through it. It takes about that, but I'll see if I can sort of speed it up. And again, the questions don't have to just be here for our presentation. You can always reach out to us. Our information is available out there, and we're happy to answer questions and get in touch with you at any time.
I will also interject here that I set the seminar to run a little bit longer, so we're not going to be kicked off. At the hour point, we'll give you an option to stick around or not.
That's right. We've got it. We booked it for an hour and a half, but we know everybody's schedules are different, so we want to make sure we try and get you guys as much extra time as we can, or answer questions, because I know that's very valuable too. So my portion of this is really to talk about it's time to think about moving. And what I'd really love for people to get out of this presentation, I just want to walk through this slide, is that you're going to, by listening to what I'm saying, you're going to get some reasons to consider when it's time to make a change to where you live. So what are some of the things that might drive that need to change? Some of the thoughts and stresses that are involved with moving. And so you can get through it, but it's important to recognize that it is not an easy process when we're making a physical move. Some things to consider when looking at what will be the next right living situation for you. A lot of that actually goes back to what Colin was talking about earlier. If your current dwelling can't be fit for you or isn't quite right for you, you need to start thinking about what will be right for you in the next 10 years. The financial implications, there's some stress there too. And if you're moving from one home to another, can you afford to carry 2 mortgages if you're carrying mortgages? What if you're selling one, buying one? All those types of things. But those are very customized situations, and that's why it's important to sit down with somebody. After this, you'll have a kind of broad context of it, but it's important to sit down with somebody and talk through these things. And then, of course, I'll go through at the very end a very brief synopsis of my own parents' real life story. I was not their realtor. I'm in Connecticut. I'm licensed in Connecticut. I'm not licensed in Rhode Island. But I can tell you that it was a very interesting and eye-opening experience. And hopefully we'll get something from that. So first we have to start thinking about, well, what kind of physical changes or, changes in my mobility are going to start happening over the next 10 years? Because I like to look at this as we come back to Generation Bridge, and we look at caregiver and aging. One of the biggest things there is to, one, plan, because planning gives you control. We don't know when that emergency or issue is going to happen, and that's sort of out of our control. But if we have a good plan in place and we've kind of built some sort of idea of about how we want to live in the future, then we're going to minimize the impact of those emergencies. We can't necessarily stop them, but we can minimize the impact. But physical changes in mobility are a real thing. I know that I am not the same guy I was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I can't do the same things. I used to play soccer. I can't do those things anymore the same way I could then. The same will be the case when I start to get a little bit older in my life. And what are the things that I'm going to need to sort of pivot on as I start to recognize that I can't necessarily mow 2 acres all the time anymore. Those are the types of things we think of when it's physical changes and mobility. One of the biggest things here is the house becomes too much house. You know, a lot of times this is what's happening as the kids leave. We now have this house that had 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms. Perhaps the master bedroom was on the 2nd floor. It's a little bit too much for what we want. And so we want to downsize and keep things more limited. Maybe we don't want to do all the gardening on the landscaping for 2 acres. Maybe it's just becoming a full-time job to keep up with the house. How do I get my quality of life back in order to kind of live the life that I want to live, but still recognize that I'm not able to do the things that I used to do? And the other side to that is running a house becomes a full-time job or just expensive. You know, if we start thinking about, well, if I can't clean it as much, then I have to hire people in to clean, you know, and it's going to cost more money that way. Or, you know, it's too much money to heat when I'm only living in the downstairs. These are all things that we start to think of from a logical perspective when we're starting to evaluate whether or not we want to stay in this house that we loved and maybe don't love as much as we did before. I do want to point out when it comes to moving, that moving is very stressful. And we all know that. I don't think any of us have ever wanted to move more times in our life. I've moved, I think, 4 times in my life, and I really don't want to do it for another 20 years or so. I would say that, you know, when we think about our current home and we're moving, some of the things that Colin talked to before in terms of the return on investment, if we're thinking about moving in the next couple of years, then we want to avoid doing major expenses. Major structural things, yes, we want to do. If your roof is leaking, you should fix that because that will come up in an inspection. But if you're thinking about doing your kitchen, but you're also thinking about moving in 2 years, it may not be the right time to do something major in your kitchen. We really, when we think about marketing a property, the biggest thing that you can do is a very low cost thing, which is concentrating on cleaning up and decluttering. But I will say that that's also very stressful. So it's something that as you're getting in this, you know, we're talking with Colin here and he's saying, you know, what do you want to do to live in your house for the next 10 or 15 years? One of the big things you can do for that period is to start that decluttering process so that when it does come time to move, that you are able to do so without having to do as much cleaning up at the last moment. I know I've talked with a friend who was trying to get on. I think she was having some difficulty. But we've just recently had the same conversation, and she's been doing that for the last 3 years. She doesn't have a need to leave in the short term, but that's what she's concentrating on. The next home, what are you looking for? And what do you need to think about in terms of what you want? What are your dreams? What's your personality traits? All those things will inform where you want to live and the style of living in terms of the location or even the type of home or community that you select. And then the other side too is considerations on finances. So you really do want to, when you're making this decision, you want to talk with a good group of people to give you good advice about what to do with that. Whether it's understanding your mortgage options, it's your realtor talking about what's it going to take to get your property up and on the market, and then also what it's going to take to get to the new place. And then the other side too is, as Colin was talking about, you know, the estate planning side. These are big assets that we're talking about, and I have to say, I personally believe that the government wants to bankrupt us by the time we die. You don't get Medicaid coverage or anything else like that until you've lost everything or you've spent everything, basically. So there are certain things that you might be wanting to do to protect your financial estate for your loved ones in the future. And then again, the move itself. So you've got a new home, you've got a buyer, but now you actually have to get all that stuff that you've had over the years into your new place. And that can be very stressful as well. I will say this, one of the most meaningful things that I had as a son of a parent who was moving was that they were open to ask. In the beginning, they were not. In the beginning, they didn't want to be a burden. But as that move out date started to get smaller and smaller, right, they finally started to open up and ask for the help that they needed. And it felt great for me. So if you're thinking that you don't want to ask for that help because you don't want to be a burden, recognize that every family situation is different, but some people really are going to appreciate that you reached out to them and asked them for help, and they're going to be so happy to actually provide that help. And then the other side, the last piece of it is, how are you going to make this new place your own? Maybe the furniture you're bringing isn't necessarily what you want to keep. So you might be thinking about new furniture and those types of things. The other side too, the social network that you're going to be building in that place. So I do want to just quickly move us through sort of some stuff dealing with your current home. This is actually the same site I think that Colin was referencing. I pulled this in terms of a return on investment for the type of change that you make. So again, when we're typically talking with someone who's looking to sell their home, we're telling them declutter, clean up, do some minor landscaping, make the place look good, and that's going to give you a bigger bang for your buck than any major types of renovations. When we look at this, this has Bridgeport, New England, and 2019 national averages here in the US. One of the biggest things that you could do in our area is a garage door replacement. It's relatively low cost, but it'll have a good visual impact out to the street. And that's just something that says, you know, that you don't have to spend a lot of money on, but it looks nice. It's a marketing piece. But when it comes to bathroom, kitchen remodels, and so forth, you're better off doing sort of the minor remodels if you're going to do them. So, and again, I always recommend if you're going to do a kitchen remodel, it's because you want it and you want to live in that house for a period of time with that. If you're doing it for resale value, most cases, it's not going to add too much to your value. Every market is different. Every place is different. So you really do want to have that consult. But for the most part, you can see here on the averages that the cost recouped is not usually anywhere near as much as what you actually spent on it. The other piece to that is that whatever you do may not be of the taste of the buyer who's coming in. So we all go through a house as on the buyer side, we're looking at it from terms of how am I going to make this mine? You may have spent a ton of money on a kitchen, but somebody comes in and looks at it and says, I'm going to have to redo this kitchen. And so you have to be very careful. If you do something that's too ornate, too colorful, too et cetera, it may not be the style of the person coming in. Really what they want is to have the space open and clean so that they can picture their own lives in that space. I can't emphasize it enough. You've heard me say it a lot. If you can take away one word from this whole thing on my side of the presentation, it's decluttering. I can tell you my parents were 30 years in their home, and my stepfather had built 2 additional barns to take care of the things that were his hobbies, like building antique tractors and Ford Model A cars. Those were his hobbies, and he loved them, but he was building up all that stuff, and he had kept so many different tools and I guess engine parts and everything else that he had to keep building space to contain it all. But when it comes time to sell it, that obviously doesn't look great to see all that stuff around the house. So we have to then start to declutter. So the more you can do that proactively in life, leading up to the time when you might have to make that move, the better. I put here, you know, decluttering isn't just about, you know, necessarily taking things to the dump. They can be. There are companies like Junk Luggers and Cherry Hill where you can go and take care of this stuff, and you want to get it out of your house, do it. It'll make you feel better after it's done. Sometimes it's hard to let go, but it'll make you feel better after it's done. But then there's also places like Goodwill where you can donate things, because if you're not using something and someone else can get value out of it, it's great to have those types of resources. The other side too is you might have people in your family or network who are very good at using some of the new tools to sell used stuff. Facebook Marketplace is one of the good examples there. And I know that I have friends who have basically got their grandkids to sell things on Facebook Marketplace for them, and they give them a commission on it. And so it works for both. One, they're decluttering. 2, they're actually paying for their grandkids something, a little commission. And then 3, you know, the family's coming together and actually figuring out what things they may want or they want to pass on somewhere else. Craigslist, eBay, these are all places. But then also there are professionals that do this. And in the notes that we'll distribute afterwards, I have a couple of other links to sites here in Connecticut with people who handle this. But this is Downsize Managers. They're here in Connecticut as well. They are professionals who will come to you and do a consult. They'll sit down with you and say, you know, what do you want to get rid of? The kind of 4 pieces. What are you going to keep? What are you going to sell? What are you going to donate? And then what are you going to throw out, right? These are people that will come in and help you go through that process. And sometimes if you know there's going to be some tension between people in a household about what to give away and what to throw out, sometimes it's good to have a neutral party come in and kind of walk through that with you. It might be worth the expense to do that. But again, I can't say it enough, clean and organize. So decluttering and then clean and organize gives you the biggest bang for your buck. And the main reason I want to say that is because when it comes time to market that home, it is amazing how important photographs are today. You know, it might have been more about, you know, maybe 20, even 30 years ago, if it was something that was in the newspaper, you had a couple good photos, the outside was important. Now people are going on to realtor.com and all these other places, Zillow and all those guys, to see these homes, and they're very informed when they're coming in, and they're making short lists very efficiently by taking a look at the photos. And it is amazing the difference that one, being clean and decluttered, but also using a professional photographer can mean. So I wanted to show you this picture here. This is a picture of my parents' house after it was decluttered, and it took them a couple of weeks to really get things to a place where they felt comfortable having someone come in and photograph it like this. But the realtor was working with them as well and saying, this is why you want to do this. This is what's going to happen. They had a realtor before. So these are pictures from the second time it was listed. The realtor before just listed the property, took photos. My uncle and I had to go up there and take additional photos because they were dark, gloomy, and didn't showcase the property. But we're not professionals either. We don't have all the attachments and lenses and everything else. When they did this, and the realtor that was working with them was able to position the property correctly, it netted in I think it was around $80,000 extra, because the first realtor was saying that they would have to sell it for about $80,000 less. And by just doing this simple thing, it created the marketplace for their house. So being clean and decluttered is extremely important, not just because it makes the house look good when it shows, but it's the photos that get people's interest. So some reasons why we might decide it's time to move. Doctors, therapy, other medical appointments. You know, again, I look at this as being sort of quality of life type things. So here in Monroe, it's not so bad. I mean, we're about 20, 25 minutes away from sort of the main hospitals. But still, that's a decent amount of distance. In my parents' case, they were 40, 45 minutes away. And so it becomes more important. If you're going to the doctor more often and you don't like being on the road, this becomes one of those types of things where you say, it's time for me to start moving closer to the things that I do every day. As we talked about in terms of not necessarily enjoying driving as much, I used to love to do the long road trip, and I used to love to drive through overnight. I can't do that anymore. I get tired at about 11:30, and I don't want to risk it. I just know that I physically can't do it. I don't like the lights coming at me and so forth. And I know that my parents enjoy it even less. And so it becomes a barrier even for them to come visit us as much, because they don't like to drive as much. So if driving places is something you need to do in your current place, and it's not something that you really want to do anymore, it might be time to move closer to the things that you love to do. Family. For me, this, at least in my mind right now, most important thing. I pray every day that my children will decide to live here close to us and stay in town. I doubt that that's going to happen. But when we retire and it's time for us to think about our next stage, being close to our family is going to be extremely important to us. And if our children have moved, then we're going to want to be much closer to them. So these are some of the reasons that might go through your mind, but everybody's got, again, their own individual situation. And then when you start to think that it is time to go and find that next thing, it's really important to think about what's important to you. And so I look at this and I think, if I don't want to be driving as much, I have more doctor's appointments, but most of my appointments are in this area, then perhaps it's time to go to that area. Or I really love going to the library. Well, maybe being closer within walking distance of a library is something to really consider. Or I want to go to some place that has a lot of activities for people like me, in my age group, and whatever. Those things have to be talked through. And then once you kind of figure out what's really a priority in your life, as Colin had mentioned earlier, even if you're staying at home, it's really important, because then you understand you have a plan on how to get the most out of your life, and how to try and be local to what the things are that you do love to do. So the last portion of this, before I get into my parents' situation, is the types of homes to consider. So you think through what types of homes themselves, the physical layouts of them, or the communities and housing choices that exist. So some people initially think about a ranch, and we all know that it's not this kind of ranch. Although that might be a dream for me someday. I can't imagine if I'm 70 years old that I'm going to be wanting to work a ranch like that, but I will want a ranch like this. I really do value, and we've seen it in our own house, where my parents have a hard time coming up and down the stairs when they come to visit, and my in-laws as well. This kind of house is exactly what Colin was talking about before, the zero entry. So I may not need that today, but if I'm 70 years old, I might need it when I'm 80. And I really don't want to have to do major reconstruction at another point in my life. So if I can do more of that stuff now, if I can plan for the house that I want to buy, and then also whatever house I buy, perhaps I do have someone like a Colin come in and tell me, here's what we need to do to make this thing accessible for you for the next 20 years. You know, I recently saw a stat that men who reach 65 live an average of 18 years more. And then women who reach 65 live an average of 21 years more. So we frequently think about the US national life expectancy average, right? And it might be something like 78 years old. But really that's not true, because that takes into account all those who died earlier. If we think about the people who get to 65, that's really what we are looking at in the retirement community. And you might have 20 more years in the house that you're looking at. And it's important to think about, what do I want to get out of the next 20 years? There are also places like, there's this website here, 55places.com, is a great place to go and explore the different retirement or active adult communities that exist. My in-laws moved into Oxford Greens, which is up in Oxford. My father-in-law is an avid golfer, and so that was really important for him. But they also have so many different activities, and they're very social. So it's important for them to have those types of things going on in their lives. For my parents are a little bit less social. So being out in the wilderness is not such a bad thing. But these 55 plus adult communities are great places where a group of people have similar interests and needs and lifestyles. Housing developments now are actually starting to take more into account the needs of an aging population. You know, I've talked with my manager over at Coldwell Banker and Trumbull, and previously, you know, builders were building bigger homes because that's what you need to do to get the most margin out of a piece of property that you're developing. That said, now some of the developments realize that there are different tastes. Younger people don't want to buy as much home because they want it to be more energy efficient, cost less overall to maintain, and also that they don't want to have this bigger space. They want it to be green. And then at the same time, it benefits because those in an aging world are looking for single level living. And so there are more developments that are now, even though they're not 55 plus, that are taking into consideration the different changes and tastes of today's market. Apartments, condos, townhouses, and co-ops. Again, if you want to be around other people, these are great options. Plus, you don't have to take care of the landscaping, and so many other the common things that you need to do are taken care of. They often have great meeting places or health facilities and so forth that you can take advantage of. And then there are all kinds of new housing and living models that are just flooding the market, partly because, again, as we look at an aging population that is so large, there's just so much need for diversity in terms of lifestyle. So you're seeing things like artist communes or people that are coming together under similar interests, and they're aging together in the same space, even though it's not necessarily their immediate family. It's people who are like family for them. Or you have models like Home Haven, and Colin has worked with them and presented to them as well. But Home Haven in New Haven is a place where different homeowners who qualify in certain, you know, in the aging in place kind of situation, but they come together and they join a membership where they get to participate in similar activities. They might actually, and you know, Colin, you would be able to speak to this better than me, but I see places like this as eventually having buying power to get discount rates negotiated amongst vendors and other types of things. You know, ultimately coming together as a collective to exercise power. But these places exist in different cities and are popping up all over the place. And so if you're thinking about a new place to go into or a new city, you might be looking for communities like this that you can participate in. And then also, where do you want to live? So this is a little bit of a depressing slide. I just want to say that Connecticut ranks 33rd according to this wallethub.com analysis on best and worst states to retire. It's got a total score of 50.72. The affordability rank is really what brings it down. So we are an expensive state and we all know it. And it's not very good economically or financially retiring in Connecticut. But quality of life is pretty high. And then also our healthcare options are really high. But there are places like Florida, Colorado, New Hampshire, and Utah that rank far above. And if location isn't restricted for you, you might be looking at some of these other places to get the most bang for your buck wherever you retire. And then what about when you are buying and selling at the same time? And we're going to wrap this up in just a moment with my parents' stuff. But again, we talked about the financial stress that comes with that. It is difficult when you are moving to think about, oh my gosh, I'm carrying a mortgage and now I'm buying a new home. What kinds of things can be done? I can tell you that with my parents, it was fortunate the people who were buying the home, and my parents weren't in any hurry. So they negotiated that the closing would be about 3 months after the offer was made. And the reason for that was they wanted to see if they could get their house sold. And it was contingent on them selling their house. So there was this sort of lower risk to them. They weren't committing to something without having the other piece done. There are many flexible things, and it's important to talk with mortgage professionals and also your realtor when thinking about what's the strategy that's right for you. So in this case, here is my parents' home. This is where I grew up most of my life. It's a 26-acre property in West Greenwich, Rhode Island. But the reason why the price isn't necessarily so high is it's isolated. That's one piece. But the other side is that West Greenwich has zoning laws that don't allow you to subdivide. So if someone is buying a 26-acre property, they are buying a 26-acre property. They are not given the rights to kind of subdivide it at this point in time. In the future, maybe they will, but you're really selling this house to an individual who wants to live this lifestyle. And part of what makes this lifestyle unique, again, outside of being a big property that is much harder to take care of when you get older, as the snow comes down and everything else, but it also has multiple barns and multiple things that are on this property that are great for someone who might be a mechanic, someone who might be a contractor, something like that. And so by taking good pictures of the property, and you can see it's all cleaned up, all the tools look good and organized, everything, they're illustrating to the right buyer what you want to get out of this property. And in fact, we used a picture of my daughter on the Model A because we were showing at that point that this is the memories that you're going to build on a property like this because you have the freedom to do so. It really helped to communicate this out, and we were able to find that buyer by marketing to different auto clubs in the state, different hunting clubs in the state, people that really wanted to have an outdoor experience. And then lastly, my parents only moved 5 miles away. I really wish they'd moved closer to us, but they still love that lifestyle and they love West Greenwich, Rhode Island, and I completely understand it. But even though it's only 5 miles, it made a huge difference because that 5 miles is back roads. And that was about a 15-minute cut, or it cut about 15 minutes off of their trips to grocery stores and other things. What normally would take them 30 to 40 minutes is now taking them 15 to 20 minutes. And that was a huge difference in terms of making it more comfortable for them to get to where they wanted to go more often. Same thing with hospital visits and so forth. And so this is the house that they actually chose to build a house. And so they built this house, a single level property. You can see my stepfather is standing in front of a stairway, but that actually goes up to an attic. They just wanted to have a much more accessible attic than a pull down set of stairs or something like that. And then, you can see that my mom's looking out over the deck there. They're going to have that enclosed and they're going to make it a 3-season room kind of thing. And they've built it to what they wanted, and they've built the house of their sort of dreams. And at the same time, it's a much more manageable space and easier to take care of than the property that they were at before. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to questions. I'll stop sharing my screen. I know, Colin, you've got a screen that you wanted to put up here on the question side.
Okay, so while we do that, let me share my screen.
All right, and I'm going to just kind of go through some of the chat questions that I see here.
Yes, I was.
I see that Darlene has asked a couple questions. Oh, all right, hold on. The questions just disappeared. Here we go. Back to the chat. There we go. So Darlene had said, how is COVID affecting real estate environment? How are homes currently for sale protecting their homes? And then also what is your view on the value of staging? Okay, so I've got 3 questions there. The first, how's COVID affecting the real estate environment? I can tell you in Monroe right now, it's a very hot market. The reason it's hot is because there's less people selling. I think that if you think back to COVID starting, I don't think it has a major impact now. But obviously people don't want to have people walking through their homes doing it the same way. So the way that homes are being shown and the way that people are getting the information out there is changing a little bit. But the market is hot in Monroe because there's not a lot of inventory. The other side to that is that we're seeing some people from like New York and other areas that are more urbanized looking into places like a Monroe, Trumbull, Newtown, et cetera. They're looking to get away from the proximity that you may, as you have some fears of, being infected or something like that. Obviously, if you get to a more rural environment, that decreases. So as they come out from those city environments, they are looking into our places as being an option for them. The way that we show, again, changes. There are video tours now. There are oftentimes video open houses. In the end, though, if you're going to sell your home, you have to accept that somebody's going to have to come through. We do make it very clear, especially for homeowners that are concerned about it. We make it very clear that you have to go in with a mask. You cannot be exhibiting any symptoms. So your temperature is taken. We often bring gloves with us. And then we also will take, in many cases, homeowners will provide those little booties to put around the feet. Again, minimizing any type of potential sources of infection. We really want to take that to heart. So video becomes a part of it, but you're not likely to buy a home strictly on video. So that's some of the big changes in terms of how we sell. When it comes to staging, it all depends. I look at it like this. The first and most important thing that we've talked about up to this point, decluttering, right? Getting it to look nice and open and clean. Let's just say symmetric even. If you've got big bulky furniture though, then it might pay to do a little bit of staging. If you've got those big puffy couches and things like that eat up the space in the room, you may decide that it's good to put those somewhere else for a little while, or if you're thinking about selling or donating, that you do that, and then you have it staged with some smaller, cleaner stuff. Again, the more space that you can show in an environment, the better. But most of the time, you can get away with that just using the same stuff that you've already got, just reducing some of the stuff that might be in there. So let's just say you had, 2 end tables and a coffee table. Well, you may take the end tables out. And that's sort of a way of staging without having to change and add an expense to it. In certain types of environments, if it's like a luxury home, and you're trying to promote an image of that luxury, then it may make sense to do it. But it's an individual choice, and you'd have to really look through what you think you're going to get out of the property. If it's a property that's got to be priced aggressively because maybe it does need a little bit more work or something else, then you may decide that it's not worth the investment to put the staging on there. Any other questions from this side of the presentation? Looks like we're good. So I do just want to point out that, again, we are available for questions anytime you might need them. I know that was a quick run through. Every one of these types of situations is an individual situation. Nothing is cookie cutter. And so it does pay. If you've got a realtor that you trust and you want to use them, you want to sit down with them and talk through kind of what you're doing. The more that they know, the better they can help you with that. Same thing with Colin. The more you can sit down with someone who's knowledgeable about it, the better your plan is going to come, or the better your plan will be. It's just important to take that control while you can. And again, I can't emphasize that enough, that if you want to stay in control, you've got to do the things ahead of time, because you don't want, when an emergency happens, that all the control is now gone from that situation. And so, as Colin was talking about earlier, having those plans and setting it up for the next 10 or 15 years is a real important discussion to have. Even if you don't do anything with it, you're going to be smarter about the things that you want to do for the next 10 or 15 years.
That's great. Thank you, Brian. We had everybody stick around for the whole thing, so that's wonderful. Thank you all for your patience. And as Brian says, if you have any questions, reach out to us, and we're always available.
Colin, it looks like we had one more thing. So Vivian said, great presentation. Thanks, Vivian. Appreciate that. Evie mentioned we didn't mention cost of getting advice from you. So from me, I think Colin had said there's a free 20-minute conversation. He's a little bit different. I'm a realtor. My job is to be a servant. I'm hoping that someday you'll list your house with me, or you'll decide to use me when you're looking. But I'm just, as part of Generation Bridge as well, this is just stuff, if you want to call and have a conversation, I'm more than happy to sit down with you and just talk through it. I love talking with individuals. I love face-to-face, even though we can't do it anymore. But if you want to talk through any of this stuff from your own personal perspective, I am so happy to do it. Just reach out to me.
Yeah, and from my side, one of the things that people are afraid of with working with designers and architects is how much is it going to cost. So what I've done, if you saw that little slide that was the front page from my website, I've broken down some of my early services, which are kind of the diagnosis part of beginning a project, into flat fees. So let's say the accessibility inspection and a report, if that's what you're interested in, that's $350. A first visit for a more complicated design project with a one-page kind of action plan that follows up after that, that's a $450 kind of investment. And then I've got another kind of a flat fee for doing zoning research and the like. One of the values that taking it this way has is it kind of lets us date before we get married, if you will. We get a chance to work together. I get paid for my time. You get something of value that you could use with another designer if you decided to go ahead that way. So I'm sensitive to budget needs.
All right. Well, Colin, you've been recording this, so we'll make sure that through email we share some of the information from the presentation, and then also we'll try and share that link to the recording. Again, we just want to thank everybody for spending some time with us today, and we hope that you have a great weekend. God bless everyone, and stay safe.
Thank you so much.